Welcome, my fellow night thinkers. This is Sleepywise, a cozy corner of the internet where restless thoughts slow down and the quiet mysteries of everyday life unravel at their own pace. I know you've had a long day and you deserve a moment of stillness now. Just allow your eyes to grow heavy and let yourself settle into the gentle rhythm of the night. There is a tree you have passed before. You might not remember exactly when or where, somewhere on a walk you took without much intention, or through a window you were looking out of without really looking. A tree that was just there. And tonight, that feels like enough. That feels like exactly the right place to start. Settle in now and feel the blanket across you. Notice the way it sits just heavily enough to remind you that you are here, that you are still, that nothing is actually needed from you right now. Let your shoulders drop a little and let your breathing do what it wants to do. There is no hurry in any of this, and nothing needs to be figured out tonight. Just picture a tree. Nothing dramatic. Not one of those wind-swept cliff-top ones. Not something golden and cinematic. Just an ordinary tree. The kind you might walk past without stopping, standing quietly at the edge of a path or a field. Its trunk goes steadily upward, and its branches reach out in that way they do, unhurried, like they have genuinely got all the time in the world. There is something about that shape that we already seem to know. It's interesting to notice how fast a tree silhouette gets recognized, even in low light, even when it is really just a dark shape against a pale sky. Something in us reads it before we have even decided to look. The branching, the way the trunk widens at the base, it just registers. And something older than thinking responds before we do. People who study how we see things have noticed this too, which feels quietly wonderful. Apparently, there are shapes in nature that the brain holds onto very easily, not because they are simple, but because they repeat themselves at every scale. The big echoes the small, the branch becomes the twig, and the twig becomes the smaller twig still. Researchers have found that the eye moves differently across these kinds of patterns, more smoothly and with less effort, as though we have been reading this particular kind of complexity for so long that we no longer need to work at it. Breathe slowly now. The trunk of a tree is wider than any single branch would ever need, built for the whole thing, for every direction it reaches and every season it carries. The branches leave it at angles that look, from far enough away, almost thoughtful. They are never perfectly even, because a tree is never quite symmetrical. But there is a balance to it that just feels right, the weight distributed, the reaching shared out. There is something familiar about the way a canopy spreads, the way the eye moves through it without any particular direction, drifting from one branch to the next, not going anywhere specific. The mind seems to follow that drifting, and in following it, quietly slows down. Some researchers have looked into this, the way certain natural patterns give a busy mind just enough to rest on without asking anything of it. A tree seems to do that without trying. Feel the warmth of wherever you are right now, the softness underneath you, the stillness of the room. If you like, imagine a cup of something warm between your hands, something gentle, something that smells like rest. And somewhere out there in the quiet, a tree is just standing the way it always does, the way it was before today and will be long after. Inside its leaves, right now, light is being turned into the very substance of the wood. It is something so precise and so delicate that the people who spend their lives studying it still seem quietly puzzled by parts of it. Something about the way it handles light belongs less to ordinary chemistry than to stranger, smaller things not fully worked out yet. Nothing about a tree announces any of this. It just stands there in the shape it's growing made, and somehow, without knowing quite why, that feels familiar too. Somewhere beneath the bark, something is happening right now. It has always been happening. Through every afternoon we walked past a tree without giving it a second thought, through every season that came and went, through every long quiet night like this one. It makes no sound at all, and it doesn't ask for anything. It just continues in the dark, in these impossibly thin living layers sitting just beneath what any of us could ever see. Let yourself settle a little deeper now and feel the surface beneath you soften as the day's weight releases. Maybe there is something warm nearby, the last of a drink gone cool, a blanket pulled close, the quiet hush of a room that has gradually stilled. Let all of that just hold you. What follows doesn't need effort or focus, only the kind of attention that drifts more than it tries. We are going inward now, just beneath the bark, beneath the texture you might trace with your fingers on a slow afternoon walk. There, in a layer so thin it is almost hard to believe it exists at all, something is happening at a pace so gentle and so continuous that it feels a little like sleep itself. There is a word for it, though the word matters much less than the feeling of it. Cambium, the living sleeve sitting just inside the bark, wrapping the whole tree, so fine it would be invisible to the naked eye. Inside it, cells are dividing. Not urgently, not all at once, just slowly, the way fundamental things tend to happen, without any announcement, with only the quiet building up of small events that, over a long enough time, become something you can actually see and touch. A tree doesn't grow the way a wave breaks. It grows the way a thought forms, from somewhere unhurried and interior. The trunk, all that breadth and solidity, isn't one season's work. It is the long memory of countless tiny divisions, each one adding something so fine it would be invisible on its own, but which, laid down year after year, becomes wood, becomes ring after ring, accumulating in the same patient dark we are resting in right now. Feel yourself breathe in and out and in again. The cells in the cambium divide inward and outward, some moving toward the bark, becoming part of the outer protective layer, and others moving deeper toward the heartwood, becoming part of the permanent record the tree quietly keeps of its own existence. What I find quietly remarkable is that each cell, in the very moment of dividing, somehow seems to know which direction to become, whether to form the dense wood that carries water or the softer tissue that carries sugar. How that decision gets made, at the scale of a single cell, is something people are still slowly working out. There is something oddly familiar in that, the way so much of what we become seems decided somewhere we cannot quite see. At the very tips of the roots and branches, other small regions do their own unhurried work, where cells form that have never existed before, stretching slowly in response to the tree's own interior chemistry. Not instructions exactly, more like tendencies, the kind of knowing that doesn't need to be said out loud to be followed. The cambium doesn't speed up in spring because it is eager. It speeds up because warmth arrives and moisture comes and the conditions shift in ways that are responsive rather than rushed. And when winter comes, it doesn't collapse. It rests and it waits. There is even some suggestion that cells approaching winter carry a kind of quiet preparation, a slow internal shift that begins before the cold actually arrives. It is as though the tree is already reading the shortening light long before the temperature drops, already getting ready in some way that hasn't been fully explained yet. The darkness behind your closed eyes is something like the darkness inside the bark. Still and warm, full of something moving so slowly, it feels like nothing at all. And yet, given enough time, everything. Nothing about a tree is accidental, and yet nothing about a tree is really decided either. Not in any way that resembles the kind of deciding we do, the weighing up, the going back and forth, the lying awake, turning something over. The tree doesn't deliberate. And still, somehow, over time, it ends up exactly the shape it needed to be. Sink a little deeper into wherever you are and feel the warmth of the blanket, the give of whatever is beneath you. The body has already started letting go of the day, the tight places, the held places, the shoulders that just forgot to come down. Let them come down now. There is something almost instructive about what a tree does, though it isn't trying to teach anything. It just responds, and in responding, gradually, it finds its shape. There are two forces working on every growing tree, all the time, without stopping. One comes from above, one comes from below, and between them, quietly and without any hurry, the tree is always in some kind of negotiation. Light arrives from above, not always directly, not always generously, but always from somewhere. And the living chemistry inside the tree notices, not in any way that resembles awareness, more the way a river notices a stone, by simply moving differently around it. Where light falls more strongly on one side of a young shoot, a certain molecule builds up more on the shadowed side, and where it builds up, cells stretch a little more, nudging the tip almost imperceptibly toward the brighter side. It isn't the tree reaching for the sun exactly. It is more like the sun pulling the tree gently toward itself, through chemistry, through this slow, invisible redistribution. The curve that results isn't drawn deliberately. It just accumulates, one small adjustment then another, until what started as a straight shoot has become something that bends, softly and without drama, toward what it needs. What I find quietly interesting is that this same messenger, the one that bends, shoots toward light, also sends roots growing the other way entirely. The same signal gets read differently depending on where in the tree it lands, each part understanding its own version of the same thing. How that works exactly still seems to hold some mystery. Breathe slowly now, in and out. And then there is gravity, always there, never quiet, pulling down on every cell, on every branch that dares to extend itself sideways into open air. The tree doesn't resist gravity so much as work with it, and against it at the same time. Roots tend to go with it, deepening and spreading and holding. Shoots tend to go against it, upward toward the open sky, in the direction gravity makes difficult. How does a root know which way is down? There are small, dense structures inside certain cells, tiny granules that settle slowly under gravity, sinking toward whichever surface of the cell is lowest. In settling, almost like sand drifting to the bottom of still water, they seem to trigger a redistribution of growth signals. A root curves earthward, and a shoot straightens itself after being tilted by wind or by the quiet weight of early snow. I sometimes think about the idea that everything we call upright might actually be a constant correction, that the straight trunk of a tall tree isn't stillness at all, but the record of thousands of small adjustments written in wood so slowly and continuously that from the outside it just looks like it was always that way. There is something restful in that idea. We don't have to be still to appear still. We just have to be adjusting slowly enough that no single adjustment shows. Right now, the body is doing something very much like that. Small recalibrations happening somewhere below awareness, all of them tending patiently toward the balance that sleep needs. The negotiation is invisible, and the result, given enough time, is beautiful. Let the forces hold you. There is movement inside the stillness. You couldn't see it if you tried. You could press your hand flat against the bark of the oldest tree you know and feel nothing. Just the faint roughness of the surface, the coolness of the outer layer, the solid patience of something that has been standing far longer than any of us have been walking around. And yet inside, right now, something is moving upward. Slowly and continuously, without a pump, without a heart, without anything pushing it from below. Just rest with that for a moment. Let your body settle fully. The weight of your head, the length of your arms, the particular heaviness of legs that carried you all day and are only now being asked to do absolutely nothing. There is warmth near you somewhere. The last warmth of a drink finished earlier maybe. The softness of blankets that have been quietly keeping your shape. Let all of it hold you, and let go of any sense of needing to arrive somewhere tonight. Water is rising through a tree right now. Not trickling, not rushing, just rising, in threads so fine they are nearly impossible to really picture, through channels in the wood no wider than a human hair, and some of them narrower still. From the deepest roots in cool, dark soil, all the way up through the trunk, through every branching passage, and out finally to the very edges of the canopy. There the leaves hold their tiny openings toward the air and let the water go, invisibly, as vapor just drifting off into the atmosphere and quietly gone. And it isn't pumped. There is no pressure building from somewhere below, no force pushing it upward. What is actually happening is almost the opposite, a kind of pulling, starting not at the roots but at the leaves where water evaporates and in leaving creates a small continuous absence, a gentle need. That need travels back down through the column like a whisper passed along, into the branch, into the trunk, into the root, and finally into the soil where more water gets drawn in to replace what the air took. There is something familiar about that, the small departure that sets a long, invisible chain in motion, the way one quiet thing makes room for another. What makes any of this possible is something in the nature of water itself, something that has nothing to do with trees at all. Water molecules are drawn to each other, clinging together in a way that becomes genuinely remarkable when they are moving through something as narrow as a hair's width. They hold, and when the water at the top gets pulled into the leaf and then into the air, it pulls the water just below it, and that pulls the water below that, all the way down through the full height of the trunk. A column that should, by any reasonable expectation, just fall, held together by nothing mechanical, nothing solid, just holds. Because of this quiet tendency, water has to stay close to itself. What I find interesting is how strong that pulling force actually gets inside those narrow channels, stronger in some trees than you would ever expect from something as ordinary as water moving through wood. In very tall trees, it apparently approaches the limits of what water molecules can actually sustain before the whole column would snap. And most of the time it doesn't snap. It just continues invisibly, without complaint. Let your breathing slow down a little more. Imagine the tree outside somewhere, standing in the particular stillness of a night exactly like this one. The evaporation of the leaves has slowed down, the way it always does when darkness comes and the air cools. But the movement hasn't stopped entirely. It just continues more quietly, a gentle rhythm that doesn't need the sun, only the small persistent difference between what is inside the leaf and what is outside it. The whole column, from root to canopy, held together by something as subtle as the tendency of water to prefer its own company. A slow ascent, continuous and invisible, moving through stillness the way sleep moves through a body that has finally, gratefully let go. There is no arrival, only the rising. Time is not always loud. Most of it passes without any particular ceremony, without the things we build to mark it, the dates we circle, the photographs we take, the small rituals that say, "This one mattered, remember this one." Most of time is just the continuous quiet movement of one unremarkable moment into the next, building up so gradually that we don't notice it until one day we find ourselves somehow different from who we were, without ever having felt the change happening. I think the tree knows something about this, and in some quiet way, I think we do too. Let yourself be still now, really still, generously still. Feel the weight of everything today slowly leaving you, dispersing into the surface beneath you, the way warmth leaves a held thing when you finally set it down. There might be something soft near your face, a blanket whose familiar weight has become a kind of signal to the body over time. This is the place. This is the hour. This is the permission. Let that move through you the way slow things move, without announcing themselves. Somewhere inside the trunk of a tree there is a record, not written down, not kept the way we keep things, but stored in wood, in the layers of cells that the cambium has been laying down season by season, year by year, in a rhythm about as reliable and unhurried as breathing. Each year brings a new ring, and each ring is a kind of sentence in a language that has no alphabet, just width and density, and the particular quality of what was made in a generous year versus what was made when things were harder. A wide ring means a good year, rain that came when it was needed, warmth that stayed long enough. A narrow ring means something was withheld, drought mid-season maybe, or cold arriving too early, closing off growth before it had really opened. The tree didn't suffer exactly. It just grew less, the way everything grows less when what it needs goes quiet for a while. And the record holds no complaint about any of it. The narrow ring sits right next to the wide one without any sense of comparison or grievance, just present, just part of the sequence. The tree didn't know in its narrow year that a better year was on its way. It just continued at whatever pace the season allowed and let the ring be what it was. There is something quietly familiar in that, the way we too have moved through narrow years without knowing what was coming and kept going anyway. Breathe slowly, in and gently out. There is something else in the rings that I keep coming back to. Where a branch once grew and was later lost, broken in a storm, or just gradually let go as the tree directed its energy elsewhere, the wood closes over the place where it was, patiently, without urgency. New rings form around the scar, layer by layer, and the absence becomes over time a knot. Just the place where something once reached outward and no longer does, remembered only in the grain of the wood. What I find quietly remarkable is that rings from trees growing thousands of miles apart in the same century sometimes carry the same unusual signature. A narrowing, a subtle shift in density left by volcanic eruptions that sent dust high into the atmosphere and dimmed the sun fractionally across the whole planet for years. A single event, written simultaneously into wood everywhere. The trees had no idea they were all recording the same thing, and yet there it is, in the dark interior of each one, waiting to be read. Nothing needs to be understood quickly here, not even the things that connect us across distances we cannot see. The rings also hold the record of wind, of leaning, of every pressure the tree absorbed quietly and made part of itself over time. What looks uniform from the outside is always, if you look slowly enough, a record of everything it has ever been through. Layer by layer, without urgency, without announcement, the way the most lasting things tend to be made. Below everything, there is a conversation happening. It has been going on longer than any of us have been alive, longer than any single tree in any forest any of us have ever walked through. It happens in complete darkness, in the slow cold of soil that never sees light, in a language that isn't made of sound at all, just chemistry, just molecules moving between living things that have no awareness, no intention, and yet somehow exchange something that works in its patient, persistent way, a little like information. Let yourself settle down into stillness now. Not trying, not the kind of active seeking after rest that sometimes makes rest harder to find, just the simple allowing of it, the way the body, when you finally stop asking things of it, seems to know without any instruction exactly what to do. Feel the surface beneath you as something patient and generous, asking nothing except that you stay. Maybe there is still some warmth in the room, the particular warmth of a night that has fully arrived and settled. Let that be the last thing you notice about the world above. Beneath the tree, beneath the place where trunk becomes root in a transition so gradual you couldn't point to where one ends and the other begins, there is a system spreading through the soil that mirrors, in its own dark way, everything the canopy is doing in the light above. The roots branch the way branches branch, dividing and subdividing, feeling their way between soil particles, following moisture, moving toward the chemical traces that signal what they need. It's interesting to notice how the same gesture repeats itself above and below, as though the tree is simply one continuous reaching going in both directions at once. So much of any tree is invisible. What stands above the ground is only the part that light asked for, and below, in the dark, something of equal complexity spreads quietly outward, occupying in some trees more space than everything you can see above. We look at a tree and feel like we have seen it, but we have probably only seen half of what it is. There is something familiar in that, the way the most significant parts of most things tend to stay quietly out of sight. But the roots don't work alone. In the soil around the finest root tips, there are fungi, mostly invisible, spreading in threads far finer than any root, in networks that reach far beyond any single tree and connect one root system to another and another across distances no tree could ever bridge on its own. The relationship is old, much older than forests as we know them. The tree gives the fungus what the fungus can't make for itself, sugars built from sunlight and air, traveling down from the leaves through the trunk and out into the dark. The fungus gives the tree what the tree struggles to find alone: minerals from deep in the soil, water from spaces no root tip can reach. A quiet exchange, running all the time, asking nothing of the night. But it isn't just nutrients moving through these connections. There are signals too, chemical gradients that seem to shift what a tree invests in and where it sends its energy. A neighboring tree under stress sends something different into the shared network than one growing easily, and others in the network may respond in ways that are still not fully understood, adjusting and redirecting in ways that seem to help the whole. What I find quietly interesting is that some of this signaling seems to move faster through the fungal threads than you would expect from simple chemistry diffusing through soil. How it manages that, through something so fine and fragile, is still being gently looked into. What if the patience of a forest isn't really the patience of separate trees, each one just enduring on its own? What if it is the patience of something connected, something that shares the difficult years as well as the good ones, through a network laid down in total darkness, in silence, beneath us? Let your breathing be slow and even, and let the darkness behind your eyes be something like deep soil, not empty, not silent, but full of slow exchange, full of things happening that need no light and make no sound. We are held, the way the tree is held, by networks we mostly can't see, but which are in their own unhurried way keeping us. The conversation continues, ongoing and unhurried, and not waiting for any of us to understand it. The wind doesn't ask permission. It arrives when it arrives from whatever direction the season has decided, and the tree, which has no way of stepping aside and no possibility of shelter, just receives it. It bends into it, and in bending begins, so slowly that you could never catch the moment of it, to become something slightly different from what it was before. Let yourself be still now in a way that the tree, tonight, can't quite manage. Even in the gentlest night breeze, even in the barely there movement of air you would hardly register, the upper branches of a tree are in motion, a slow pendulous swaying that absorbs the energy of moving air and passes it downward, through the branching, into the trunk, into the wood itself. You can't feel that from where you are. You can only rest in the particular quiet of complete stillness, the weight of you held by whatever is beneath you, the warmth of blankets, the hush of the room, the softness that has been waiting all day for you to finally and fully arrive. What wind does to a tree isn't dramatic, and that is maybe the most important thing about it. It is slow and continuous, and in the most patient sense, it changes everything. When a young tree bends in wind, the trunk flexing, the wood on the windward side being stretched, and the wood on the sheltered side compressed, something gets registered at the level of the cell. Not through anything like a nervous system, not through sensation, just through the mechanical fact of bending itself, which quietly and persistently changes what the next cells to be laid down will become. Denser and thicker-walled, a little more able the next time the same force arrives to hold. The tree doesn't prepare for this in advance. It doesn't grow strong in anticipation, only in response, slowly, over many bendings, over many seasons of wind arriving from the same direction. Nothing needs to be figured out ahead of time, only received again and again, until the receiving becomes a kind of strength. What I find quietly interesting is that trees grown in completely still conditions, fully sheltered from wind, sometimes can't support their own weight when the shelter is taken away. The bending, it turns out, was the thing that built the capacity to stand. The difficulty wasn't separate from the strength. It was, all along, where the strength was coming from. Breathe slowly in and gently out. There is something familiar in that. The way difficulty received gradually and without drama becomes part of what holds us upright, not as damage, but as form. I sometimes wonder if every slight lean in a mature tree is a kind of biography, if the subtle tilt of a trunk, the asymmetry you might notice if you stood back and looked for long enough, is just the tree's own record of what it has lived through. Not a wound and not a mistake, just a shape arrived at slowly through the long absorption of disturbance into form. Let that rest somewhere in you without needing to go anywhere. The branches are part of this same slow adjustment. A branch extending horizontally, carrying the weight of its own length and the weight of leaves and rain and the occasional quiet accumulation of snow, develops wood differently along its upper surface than its lower surface. The cells seem to respond to the specific direction of strain, thickening exactly where thickening is needed, distributing the load across a structure that has been, season by season, quietly shaping itself to carry what it carries. The branch doesn't know it is doing this. It just does it. The way things that persist simply keep doing what the forces around them require. It is interesting to notice how the tree never really resists, only accommodates. The slow willingness to take in repeated stress and let it, over time, change the shape of things. To let what keeps pushing against you become, gradually and without any drama, part of what you are made of. Feel your own weight now, the heaviness of arms that have done their day's work, the stillness of a body finally and completely at rest. Not as damage, but as form, as the shape of something that has been here long enough to have met the weather and bent with it, and in bending remained. The light that touched the leaf today began somewhere unimaginably far away, not this morning and not even close to it. The light that fell on the canopy left its source 8 minutes ago, but the energy it was carrying had been traveling outward through the sun for far longer before it ever became light at all. Deep inside the sun, under pressures we have no real way to imagine, hydrogen becomes helium in a process so slow and so continuous that the energy released can take something like 100,000 years just to work its way to the surface. Then it finally escapes and begins its quiet journey across all that dark silence between worlds. All of that, to reach a leaf, to move a single molecule, to become slowly and without any announcement the wood of an ordinary tree. Let yourself be very still now, because there is genuinely nothing left to do tonight. The room is warm and quiet, holding whatever faint sounds are still coming from a world that is still turning outside. You are at the end of a day that asked things of you and you gave them, and all of that weight can now finally be handed over to whatever is holding you. Let it go the way a tree releases its leaves, not all at once and not through effort, just gradually in the time that it takes. What we have been quietly following tonight has moved across so many different scales, inward and outward, upward and downward. From that thin living sleeve of cambium where cells divide in the dark to the water molecule clinging to its neighbor somewhere inside the trunk right now. To the ring laid down in a year of unusual drought, to the root feeling its way around a stone it will never see, to the grain of wood shaped slowly by 100 ordinary windy afternoons. And now the scale just keeps widening, the way it does when you step out of a warm room into the open night and feel, before anything else, the depth of everything above you. The carbon in the wood of a tree was, not all that long ago in geological terms, just floating in the atmosphere. Invisible and weightless, part of this enormous slow cycling that moves between the air and the ocean and the soil and the bodies of living things, a circulation so old and so vast that the life of any single tree feels intimate beside it. The tree drew that carbon in through tiny openings in its leaves, not greedily and not in great quantities, but continuously and patiently, in the thin stream of exchange that happens whenever a leaf sits in light and air at the same time. Combined with water drawn slowly up from the roots, rearranged at the molecular level by energy arriving from the sun, and built cell by cell and ring by ring and season by season into the solid, patient form of wood. What we call a tree is partly just condensed atmosphere, a shape made from air and light and the particular chemistry of this small planet. And the air that made it is the same air we are breathing right now in this quiet room at the end of this quiet day. The seasons that shaped those rings don't come from anything on the surface of the Earth at all. They come from the angle the Earth holds itself at as it moves through its long orbit, a tilt of just over 23 degrees held across billions of years. And that is what gives a tree its wide year and its narrow year, and gives us that particular feeling of how completely different December is from June. What I find interesting is that this tilt isn't perfectly fixed. It shifts almost imperceptibly over thousands of years, pulled gently by the gravity of other planets in their own distant paths. The seasons themselves across deep time breathe slowly in and out. The rings of ancient preserved trees carry faint traces of this, patterns so long that no single life could ever perceive them, written into wood anyway, quietly and without interruption. Nothing needs to be understood quickly, not even the things that have been accumulating since long before any of us arrived. The branch hangs gently against the night sky, not reaching and not waiting, just extended, the long, unhurried result of all those invisible negotiations, all those slow adjustments made in darkness and in light, in dry years and generous ones, in wind and in perfect stillness. Like the space between one breath and the next. Like all of us here now, held together in the vastness, drifting. With that, I'll leave you in the quiet embrace of the night. May your thoughts feel lighter and your rest arrive with ease. Until the next quiet, why?